This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and LifeLock has tips to protect your identity. Use strong passwords, set up multi-factor authentication, report phishing, and update the software on your devices. And for comprehensive identity protection, let LifeLock alert you to suspicious uses of your personal information. LifeLock also fixes identity theft, guaranteed or your money back. Stay smart, safe, and protected with a 30-day free trial at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Welcome to Marvelous Disney, the podcast that discusses the most recent doings at one of the more dynamic divisions of the Walt Disney Company, which is, of course, Marvel Entertainment. This is entertainment writer Jim Hill, and my co-host, the amazing Aaron Adams, and I are recording this week's episode on Wednesday, June 21st, 2023, first official day of summer, Aaron. Also, supposed to be the longest day of the year. Today was the day that the very first episode of Secret Invasion, the latest limited series that Marvel Studios has produced for Disney Plus, dropped on that subscription streaming service. Aaron and I will be talking about that show, as well as David Gelb's new Stan Lee documentary that debuted on Disney Plus this past Friday, June 16th, already generating a little controversy. We're talking about those two shows in the second half of today's show. We'll also be paying tribute to Ang Lee's Hulk, which came out 20 years ago this week, Aaron. In fact, yesterday, the 20th, is official 20th anniversary. Then that film was back in the news this week. And speaking of news, the news portion of today's show is brought to you by Storybook Destination, trusted travel partner of the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network. For a worry-free travel experience every time, please book online at storybookdestinations.com. Typically, we start each week's show with a quick look back at the box office. All anyone in the industry could talk about this past weekend, how The Flash and Pixar's Elemental underperformed at the box office. The Flash sold 55 million worth of tickets in North America. Elemental sold 29.6 million worth of tickets, which when you cost $200 million to make, and by the way, that's reportedly what both The Flash and Elemental cost to make. Not $200 million combined, but rather $200 million each. Mm-hmm. Those are not the sort of numbers you want to see over your opening weekend in North America. On the other hand, just yesterday, Sony Pictures Animation announced that Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse has sold to date $500 million worth of tickets worldwide, and that's just 19 days after being released to theaters, and that's where you want your movie to be. Oh, by the way, before we blow past The Flash, we talked about how Nicolas Cage is in The Flash. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the interesting thing is Kevin Smith, who actually wrote the script for that Superman movie that I want to say was Superman Reborn. I'm blanking the name of the thing.
Not Superman Lives. It might be.
Superman Lives. Superman Lives. Okay. Well, the thing of it is that there's the famous story about how the studio head at that time forced Kevin to write a giant spider, mechanical spider.
Yeah, the Wild West connection. Okay.
There we go. And Kevin, for years, has complained about this. That the guy forced me to put a giant mechanical spider in the front. It was really stupid. He said, until he got to see The Flash this past weekend and saw the scene where Nicolas Cage is fighting the giant, mechanical spider. And he's like, that was actually kind of badass. So,
but they didn't have the effects budget to pull that off, or the tech wizardry back then, so it would have looked hokey as hell.
Excellent point. But I just kind of love that Kevin circled back on that idea.
We'll glance back very quickly to the Ang Lee reference, Ang Lee's Hulk. Mm-hmm. Had Favreau not been the first director of the MCU, because he's kind of, been credited for creating the blueprint of an MCU movie, could you imagine if Ang Lee were the first one to make an official MCU movie with that Hulk, and like that being the blueprint where you've got the comic panels in the film? Would that carry over through all of the... And don't get me wrong, I thought Ang Lee was an inspired choice after Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. He was, the buzz word of like a number of years there for stellar action sequences. So yeah, when he was tapped to direct, I was very eager and I liked what he did. He swung for the fences with that movie, but it's just imagine retrospect, looking back. Can you imagine if that were the blueprint for everything going forward? What our comic book movies would look like today? Bordering on frightening, but back then it was like it was an inspired choice.
And this is why I have to wait to the second half of the show, folks, because we're going to continue this conversation. I mean, you're not wrong. A lot of the stuff you cited were things that personally excited me about this movie back in 2003. But then, all right, second half of the show, we'll talk about it shortly. By the way, not all good news coming out of Sony this week. On last week's show, we were talking about how El Muerto, the Spider-Man spin-off movie that Sony has in development, the one that stars Bad Bunny as the wrestler who gains superpowers when he puts on a mystical mask.
Yeah.
Last week, Aaron, we were talking about how the writers' strike and the fact that this film the trades were reporting was supposed to go in production in August, but had this delivery date of January 12th of next year. Mm-hmm. And it's just sort of like, I don't know if that's going to happen. Well, earlier this week, Sony actually pulled El Muerto off of its release schedule.
Like altogether, not even rescheduled, just gone?
They cited two reasons. One, of course, is the writer's strike. But the other one is Bad Bunny's touring schedule. And I'm not sure when the Spider-Man spinoff will be put back into production.
Does this happen to coincide with the release of the Kraven trailer? Because when that came out, yeah. I mean, the old rule of you don't have anything nice to say, you shouldn't say anything at all. So there should just be about 5 minutes of silence from me for coming up now. But it aspires to be Morbius.
Oh!
That's wow. I know that is cold.
The referee would step in at this moment. I'm sorry. All the blows are supposed to be above the waist, sir.
Yeah. Have you seen it? Have you seen the trailer?
I have. And again, the interesting thing is they deliberately advertise it as the Red Band trailer, so it's supposed to be that much edgier.
I mean, I still have problems with the whole Rhino being able to transform into a Rhino. I think that's just wrong and stupid. And then someone had posted online like that they straight up ripped off, I believe it was Catman, who's like a DC character. But the panels that they had put up from the comic book were pretty much the trailer of him, going to shoot the lion and dad, saying something about the mother being weak, so the boy is weak. And that whole like paternal angle was in the comic as well as in that trailer. And I'm like, yeah, because when I watched it, none of that looked like a Kraven movie up until they, put him in the little coat thing or whatever at the end, and it was like, all right, well, that kind of looks like the character, but this isn't what Kraven is. So Sony, what are you doing? What books are you reading where your writers come up with this and you go, yes, that's what we want to do? I don't get it.
I do know I had kind of the same trepidation. I didn't necessarily make the connection of, look how Kraven turned out. Maybe we don't want to do El Muerto, but that's an interesting idea you're putting out there.
I mean, I don't believe that they were actually concerned about a script with El Muerto, so the writer's strike shouldn't matter at this point. So, I mean, what were they doing with that? I don't even know if they didn't have a script, they just had an idea of this is a character we can make some money off of. Can we tap into, is he a World Wrestling Entertainment type dude, or was he a Spanish wrestler? So, I mean, they just may be trying to tap into a market, by finding the niche entryway. And, I get that, but, you got to get, like, every single wrestling fan in the world of, like, Mexican wrestling to buy a ticket to that movie to get your money back. It's a tough sell.
It's a tough sell. So, okay. Well, speaking of things that, in this case, weren't postponed, but rather canceled entirely, and that's Marvel Studios' much-anticipated return to Hall H at this year's San Diego Comic-Con. Now, remember, Aaron, just last month, Alqua Cox, the talented young lady who's playing the title role in Marvel Studios' Echo, she let slip that she was taking part in a Marvel panel that was going to be staged down in San Diego on Saturday, July 22nd, which very same day that Marvel Studios made its triumphant post-pandemic return to Hall H during the 2022 edition of San Diego Comic-Con. And the reason for this delay is obvious. The ongoing writer's strike, which, by the way, entered its 50th day today. And just in case you're wondering, the writer's strike that was held back 2007, 2008 reached 100 days, folks. So we have a ways to go yet. Marvel Studios doesn't want to waste time in Hall H talking about movies and TV shows that have now been delayed or whose production is in hiatus.
Or the fact that the show that she was probably going to be promoting is all going to drop in a single day with no fanfare and then be swept under the rug.
Yeah.
That might have a little touch to do with it as well.
Perhaps. So, okay, speaking of other stuff that has been delayed, we talked on last week's show about that assembled episode that was supposed to take us behind the scenes on Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. That got pulled off of Disney Plus's schedule because the day that was supposed to drop, June 13th, was also the day that Jonathan Majors was supposed to appear in court in Manhattan to answer those misdemeanor charges that he was arrested for back on March 25th. Kind of ironic here, the Disney delays that episode of Assembled, and Majors' court appearance gets delayed by a week. In fact, it happened a week later on June 10th. And this was a status conference, Aaron. Evidently, the parties were just getting together to discuss the court case, which is on track to begin in August, though you had some interesting info you came across earlier this week, right?
Yeah, they had, I guess, been releasing some preliminary information of some sort that from eyewitnesses that I guess were testifying. And most of these testimonies are on behalf of Jonathan Majors' innocence. And so that made me, hopeful that we can have Jonathan Majors as a bad guy, but not as a bad guy, if you know what I mean. And so some of those things were like the driver of the car was going to testify that there was no raised voices or fisticuffs flying in his sight while they were in the vehicle. And there was also someone at the nightclub who was going to testify that the woman was in good shape and didn't have any bruises or signs of injury at that time. And then the last thing was, I guess, when Jonathan Majors got back to his hotel room or whatever, he had to, the door was locked from the inside, like a bathroom door or whatever, and he had to get a handyman to open it, and the woman was found there half naked and passed out on the floor. So a lot of those things really, I feel right now, are supporting, the story that Jonathan has of his innocence, and not so much for the woman who's claiming bad things happened. So hopefully that will remain true throughout the case, and we'll be able to, celebrate on the other side of it.
Well, here's hoping. Yep. Also want to do another follow-up on a story we did last week, where Aaron and I were talking about why the Incredible Hulk, that Edward Norton film from 2008, second official MCU film after the original Iron Man, is now on Disney Plus. And you were mentioning the news that was out there about the rights for the Hulk and Namor supposedly finally reverted from Universal over to Marvel Studios. So I made some calls, talked to some folks. Here's the official boilerplate language I get handed back. Universal's 2008 film, The Incredible Hulk, will finally air on Disney Plus now that the rights held by Universal for 15 years have reverted to Marvel Studios. Now, here's the thing, Aaron.
Is it the rights for the movie only?
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. See, that's the thing. When I said, okay, rights for movie, rights for, the whole character, what I basically got back is, we sent you a statement. So it's like...
legally, we are correct in that statement. We will not alter it by a single word. There we go.
Yeah. And what makes me crazy, though, is, again, we were talking about at the top of today's show about Ang Lee's Hulk. So what's the status on that one?
Well, it's not an official MCU tied to movies, so it's not as important. Not until it becomes a multiversal thing and we end up with 4 different Hulks.
Okay. Well, we'll tell you what, folks. Again, we will continue our discussion of Ang Lee's Hulk and what Aaron and I both like and dislike about the film on the second half of today's show. But first, this.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
All right, listen up, nacho chips. Quiet down, crispy potatoes. This is the moment Velveeta's been preparing you for, and you're not about to crack under pressure. Today's the day to go all in on the drip. Velveeta's Heat and Eat Queso is the MVP of any game day spread, so stick by them, and you'll be golden. Now get out there and make delicious history. No tailgate party is complete without Velveeta.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
So let's start on the Disney Plus side of the street here. And Aaron, did you actually get to watch episode 1 of Secret Invasion?
I did. It was nice to be back in the MCU once again.
It was. I want to share a story, though, before we get started here. This comes from Screen Rant. And they talked about how Ali Salem, when he was signed to do Secret Invasion, he was actually told not to read any of the comics from the Secret Invasion crossover event. And just to be clear here, there were 8 issues of this limited series, plus several tie-in books that Marvel Comics published from April through December of 2008. Here's the direct quote from Salem. When I took on this job as director, I didn't write the script, so a lot of the story-driven decisions were made by Kyle Bradstreet and the other team of writers that we had. The first thing I was told was, don't read the comics. They'll have nothing to do with what we're trying to do here. Mm-hmm. So what they seem to be doing here, at least based on episode 1, is it's really kind of a Cold War story, right? In fact, it kind of reminded me of Captain America Winter Soldier from 2014, but much, much darker. What about you?
I would kind of almost equate it more to Invasion of the Body Snatchers type of equation, because you don't know who to trust. Mm-hmm. Anybody could be the bad guy. Mm-hmm. And you do see that, where there might be a character that you've always trusted, and all of a sudden it turns out that they weren't who they seemed to be. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of that play throughout the series. I was mildly shocked to see a character with a name, a proper name in the MCU, get shot and appear to die. And I was immediately thought, Coulson died once. So I'm just going to cross my fingers and hope that named character comes back in a future episode, maybe with a limp or, holding their side. Oh, they just grazed me in the middle of my gut.
I have to admit, I don't think I've seen this take on Nick Fury to date in the MCU. I mean, this is a damaged, wounded guy. And more to the point, there were a lot of people making a very big deal about you came back from the blip different. And had you gotten that from any previous
appearance
MCU?
of Nick since the blip? No, I haven't, and I haven't seen it from any other character carrying any sort of post-traumatic blip stress either.
Yeah.
And so it does seem like out of left field, very out of place, especially for Nick Fury's character, who's probably seen the heavy shit in all of his career. So, yeah, that doesn't quite line up. So maybe, I don't know, maybe he had a different experience from everybody else in the blip. I don't know. But, yeah, right now, I mean, it's hard to put any judgment on the show because it's only the very first chapter of, how many episodes are we getting? 8, 9, 10?
6.
Oh, just
actually.
6.
Just 6.
Okay. But it was a decent length. I felt, like I got a full episode, whereas, some of those other shows, it seems like just as soon as they start moving, the credits are rolling and you're like, damn. So this one it felt like it had a room to breathe, room to start, establish its story. It didn't feel short. And yeah, I mean, since half of the characters are probably in disguise, it's kind of hard to know who's telling the truth, what's going on, what's good, what's bad. We're going to have to just go through the twisty, windy story that they end up telling us over the next 5 episodes now. I'm looking forward to it.
Same thing here. I think you summed it up beautifully. It was a nice start. I have to admit, kind of intrigued by this take on Nick Fury, but let's see where it goes. By the way, folks, I did not, and I apologize for this, let you know that, I also wanted you to check out David Gelb's Stan Lee documentary, which dropped on Disney Plus this past Friday. But I did want to talk with you, Aaron, about there's a controversy now circling this film.
Okay.
And it's that members of the Kirby family I don't want to say they've come out against the film, but they're taking issue with how much credit the filmmakers give Stan for the creation of various characters in the Marvel comic universe.
That's fair. I mean, Stan walks into an office and he's like, "Hey, Kirby, I had this idea for a kid. He's a Spider-Man, okay? So draw something." And he's got to sit there and figure out, okay, what's this costume look like? And, what's the kid look like? And what are the various action poses and all that stuff? So, Stan had some ideas, but ideas have to be carried out by someone else. And, if you're doing all of the artwork, which, by the way, has been iconic as hell since the 1960s, because every single time they make the tiniest little change to a Spider-Man costume, everybody bitches about it. And then they'll go back to the classic red and blue, and then there'll be a couple of fans who go, I didn't mind the other one so much. And then you get these cult little offshoot. But it always goes back to the red and blue, no matter what. After a little while, it's like, all right, back to the red and blue traditional.
And what's kind of interesting is Steve Ditko was brought up, and in fact, we were just talking in the last show about losing John Romita Sr. And if you think about how these artists help create the comics that we love, but again, that when you get into this area of, well, who created the character originally, it does get murky. And I was lucky enough to get to interview Stan Lee relatively late in his life. That it was that brand new animated series for the Disney Channel about Spider-Man in his high school years, and to get to interview Clark Gregg and Stan at the same press event. And Stan has told the same stories thousands of times, so they're beautifully honed and polished, and he knows where all of the gasps and the laugh lines are. So Stan was Stan. Stan was exactly who I expected him to be. And I honestly think that the part of Stan Lee's career that he just does not get credit for is that before there was social media, Stan, if you think about the letters page in the Marvel comics, the level of engagement that you saw there was all because of Stan. The Marvel Marching Society, the all of that stuff that
Stan's soapbox.
No, that's exactly. And it's just sort of like, I feel like people forget how much of a project, the success of a project is based on promotion. And I would argue that Marvel wouldn't have been nearly as successful in the 60s and 70s. Don't get me wrong. I do not mean to dismiss the contribution of Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko or Romita. But the fact that you could turn to that letter page and there was Stan responding to the Marvel faithful. Mm-hmm. What other comic? Did you ever read the letters page for DC? Did DC even have a letters page? To be honest, I don't remember.
But there was also, I don't think, a single voice for the company for DC either. I mean, like they had Jim Lee, for a little while.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like a consistent there for decades and decades and decades. Mm-hmm. Like Stan was. Even when he wasn't there, he was still out like selling his own, books, memoirs, or touring or whatever, but they were always like Marvel stories, my time back at Marvel. The other thing about those stories that he's told 1,000 times is the first like 30 to 50 times they probably weren't the best version of that story. They were probably the most honest and truthful version of the story.
Yes.
And then he'd be like, yeah, but you know what? I got a really good laugh at the 5-minute mark. If I just kind of cut out minute, 2.5 to 4.5 and kind of jump right to it, it'd be a better story. And by the way, when you're being interviewed and they're looking for just, little clips and sound bites, you've got to learn how to condense your story so they get only the good stuff. And so I think after years of telling the story of how he invented Spider-Man, by default of him wanting to tell a good story, ends up eliminating a lot of people that helped him along the way.
I think you nailed it in one there. In fact, I will tell you from my years of interviewing old animators or Imagineering veterans or that sort of thing, is that people will trot out their dinner party story that they have honed and polished, and it doesn't matter that it's truth adjacent. It's like, this is the story I tell now, and people seem to really enjoy it. Don't let the truth stand in the way of a good story. And let's not overlook the fact that we're getting into the 2000s. In fact, we'll be talking shortly about Ang Lee's Hulk. And remember, one of the fun moments in that film, I want to say you're 20 minutes in and Eric Bana is walking out of the building, but who's walking into the building? The two security guards, and one is Stan Lee and the other one is Lou Ferrigno.
Right.
Let's face it, a lot of the affection that people have today in regard to Stan Lee is, there's Stan's cameo again in an MCU film. And, they were always well written and funny. I have a package here for Tony Stank. They were just so well done. But face it, Kevin Feige and Disney had an agenda there. They wanted Marvel to have a Walt Disney. They wanted that sort of kindly grandfather figure there in the mix. And I would argue the Stan Lee that we know from the MCU really has little or nothing to do with the Stan Lee who actually worked on the Marvel Comics, but he was just as beloved because of those wonderful little cameos. So, tell you what, this coming week, if you can check out episode 2 of Secret Invasion and then the Stan Lee documentary, I'd love to get your take on it, about what you feel they got right and what they got wrong. And speaking of right and wrong, Ang Lee's Hulk, which, by the way, I thought you did a wonderful job on the front half of the show of sort of summing up. I mean, you're not wrong. That comic panel visuals conceit they used during the film was really striking. And I would argue there are Hulk things in that movie that they get so right, like the battle in the middle of the desert with the tanks. Oh my God. Also, there's that sequence where the Hulk does that amazing leap and travels miles and then just continues up. I mean, that was straight out of the books, and I loved that. But then the Hulk has unresolved daddy issues.
Yeah, that was kind of my one gripe about it too. Was this is where you're going with it, huh? Okay, I guess
that and I actually remember reading. I want to say it was Premiere Magazine that did this amazing story about the development of it, and Ang Lee wanted the Hulk story to be based somehow in nature and reality, and he zeroed in on the sea anemone.
Right.
And
yep.
it was like, well, that's why I go to Marvel movies, is because, I want them tied to nature.
And I kind of get a lot of it because they give you that little montage in the beginning of the film of the experimentation. And was something, it was like a jellyfish that turns green or whatever, but they're trying to explain little elements of where the Hulk comes from. So when he does get his gamma blast, not only does he not die from it, but he's enhanced by it. And if it would kill normal people, then how the hell did Bruce survive? And so, I guess he's just trying to logic his way through that a little bit of, we got to explain this because to me it doesn't make sense. I get it.
I don't even want to get into the Hulk dogs or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But the weird thing is, for a movie I wanted to love but liked, 20 years later, there's still a lot of stuff I remember very vividly from this thing, whether it's the Eric Bana shaving and, wiping the mirror, puny human, and there's that amazing transition moment where it's the Hulk is now coming out of San Francisco Bay and walking up the street to her, and in the process transforming back into Bruce Banner. And, I mean, again, there's a lot of stuff in it that works, but at the same time, I just feel like if somebody had just been able to pull Ong aside and it's like, you're trying too hard here. Just have some fun. It's the Hulk.
I mean, the scene where he catches the missile, bites off the warhead, and spits it back at the helicopter was enough for the price of admission, just for that one little clip. So, yeah, there's a lot of fun, great moments.
There are like the what is it when he's on the jet and the pilot is taking it into the upper atmosphere to try to knock him out into the air. Again, see, this is the thing, when you could talk chapter and verse of a film like that 20 years later, there's clearly good stuff in it.
Yep.
If I'm being honest here, I actually liked this Hulk better than the Edward Norton one from 4 years later. But for me, it wasn't until 2012 when Mark Ruffalo took on the role, and it wasn't necessarily the Hulk has to carry an entire film. It's just the Hulk is there in the mix, where it finally felt like, okay, you figured it out. So to now circle back to that weird little bit of info from Disney to the effect of the film rights have reverted back to Disney, but to Marvel.
But just that one movie.
Yeah.
No, I guess, the one thing that we can chart pretty well is it's hard for a specific character to have a story arc and change and evolve when you have like 4 or 5 movies. It's like, Bruce Willis in Die Hard. Bruce Willis in Die Hard started off as a cop in an awkward situation. By Die Hard, Live Free or Die Hard, he was like a flippin' superhero jumping motorcycles into helicopters. Like that went to ridiculous places. However, the Hulk has had a pretty extraordinary arc if you look at where he started off as, puny god, and then works his way through Thor Ragnarok, where he's just the Hulk and living his life like that, to he comes back to Earth and now he's Smart Hulk and he's able to speak and whatnot. I mean, he's had a lot of growth for being a non-title character. They don't have a Hulk movie, but they've had a good evolution of him.
And remember when last we saw him coming to the family party, bringing his son along. Yeah, character's in an interesting place. I'm going to be fascinated to see what happens going down the line with this character. Just to circle back to something we talked about at the top of second half of the show. Elise Allen being told, don't read the book, don't read The Secret Invasion. This actually happened in Disney history as well. That, in fact, the Sherman brothers once told me the story about when Walt Disney assigned them to write the score or songs for the score of the Jungle Book back in the early 1960s. And, Walt called them into the office and said, okay, we're making a movie version of this Rudyard Kipling book. And the first thing I want you to do is not read the book. And he literally tosses it over his shoulder. And it's like, okay, let me tell you what the story of this movie is. And just, lays it out that it's like, Phil Harris is a bear, and it's Walt had in his head how to do this. So
Right.
I guess this is Kevin Feige channeling for Walt. It's like, all right, Secret Invasion, lovely title. Don't read the comic book.
The problem with reading the book is you end up getting beholden to your favorite part, and then you get to the script for the movie or the series, and you're like, hey, man, why don't you have the thing with the bears in it? Well, we didn't have room or budget for the bears. No, you got to have the bears, man. Whatever that thing is that they're loved to, and especially if the comic books were dealing with a different, situation of a secret invasion. And right now we're trying to keep the MCU as we know it a cohesive thing. And so, yeah, they're going to have to go in different directions. And might I add, I am mighty, mighty thankful that I'm having a small break from multiverse storyline. I mean, seriously, it's like, I get it. Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and multiverses with all the different Kangs, and Loki's going to be back into multiverse action in a little while, and we got a Secret Wars coming up, and Multiverse of Madness with Doctor Strange, and hey, man, a spy show. Cool.
Yeah, sometimes you just need French vanilla.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Okay. Now, speaking of weird Disney-related ties, you shared a story when we were pre-gaming today about the upcoming episode of 32nd Street. That
actually, that's not the upcoming. That's going to be in 2 weeks. We just recorded the episode that's coming out tomorrow.
Okay.
It's clickbait. Tom Cruise is going to confirm this one mind-blowing controversial trait on the next 32nd Street. And of course you'll listen. And no, we will never reveal any mind-blowing controversial trait of Tom Cruise. It's clickbait. It's something tasty and juicy. I equated it to Chewbacca on the forest moon of Endor, smelling that juicy piece of meat, and he just couldn't resist himself, so he had to take it and sprung a trap, and everybody got caught. The end. So learn what clickbait is and stay away from it.
Okay, duly noted. Toward that end, we try not to do clickbait here at the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network, but we do have a couple other shows. If you have the time, we'd love you to check out. We have, of course, Disney Dish that I do with Len Testa. I am waiting for the return of Drew Taylor, who has been traveling the globe. He was in France at Annecy. He was in Rome for the red carpet premiere of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. And I'm sure he will be back with all sorts of amazing stories in the coming week, which we will then put up on Fine Tuning. We need to get a new Looking at Lucasfilm out the door. Beyond that, we also do the social media thing. Aaron, where can folks find you there?
Find me contently at Twitter at Azaprod, Azaprod.
I also do the Twitter thing, likewise Instagram. Look there under Jim Hill Media. Over on Facebook, it's Jim Hill Media News. Beyond that, if you could head over to Apple Podcasts and rate and recommend, well, not just the show you're listening to right now, Marvelous Disney, but also 32nd Street. That would be great. Also, like I said, if you really like what you heard here, it would be great if you went over and signed up for Bandcamp, and that way you can hear the interview Len and I just did with Jonathan Ackley, the former Imagineer who worked on the Kim Possible World Showcase Adventure attraction, likewise Sorcerers of the Magic Kingdom. Some great stories to share about the interactive games in the parks. And I guess for now that's going to do it. So thanks for listening, and Aaron and I will be back soon.